Put Lenin inside and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change join them, so come and change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So get on canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortunate he has been, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
전체의 사회주의를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 전체의 사회주의를 우리 백성의 영도 따라서 선군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조체의 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그대 장으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
Imperialist,
조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
내겐 남긴 태렉지 얄긴 다락에 대복시마 어던지니 헌칠생 어거지민 헌칠생 내 때문이 소스테호궁 내린지 바다를 굴려쇼
Vietnam brûle et moi je hurle Mao Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao Mao. joue Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao Mao. Les Russes mangent et moi je danse Mao Mao. Diable dénonce, je renonce Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
La base de l'armée, c'est le soldat. Le vrai pouvoir est au bout du fusil. Les monstres seront tous anéantis. L'ennemi ne périt pas de lui-même. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao.
When I was young, I used to be as fine a man as ever you'd see at the Prince of Wales. He said to me, come and join the British Army. Tooraloo, they're looking for monkeys up at the zoo. It says, one, if I had a face like you, I joined the British Army. Sarah Connon baked a cake, and so for poor old Slattery sake, sure I threw myself into the lake, pretending I was barmy. Tooraloo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army. Sergeant Healy went away and his wife got in the family way, and the only words that she could say was blame the British Army. Tooraloo, me curse upon the Labour blue that took me darling boy from me to join the British Army.
Let me give you a tip. Use your white voice.
I
got no white voice. Now, come on, you know what I mean. You have a white voice in there. You can use it. It's like you pulled over by the police. Oh, no, I just use my regular voice when that happens. I just say, back the fuck up off the car and don't nobody get hurt, man. I'm just trying to give you some game. You want to make some money here? Then read the script with a white voice.
People say I talk with a white voice anyway, so why ain't it helping me out?
Well, you don't talk white enough. I'm not talking about Will Smith's wife. I'm talking about the real deal. Like this young brother.
Hey, Mr. Kramer, this is Langston from Regal View. I didn't catch you at the wrong time, did I?
Ich trage eine Fahne, das Rot der Arbeiter macht. Es hat die Arbeiterfahne bei Nacht mein Vater bewacht und hat sie mir früh übergeben, als Morgenrot stieg empor.
Hey, young blood. Ich trage eine Fahne und diese Fahne ist rot. Es ist die Arbeiterfahne, die uns die Einheit gebot. Sie hat unsere Väter begleitet durch Ade und Nacht und Krieg. Drum fordert die Söhne erstreiten zu Ende den großen Sieg.
Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the forgeman he has been, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
주체의 사회주의를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님 백승의 영도 따라서 선군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 주체의 강중대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그대 장으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
부채의 사회주의를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님 백승의 영도 따라서 선군의 붉은 뜻이여도 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 우리 어떻게 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그대 장으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
Alright, hello everybody. We should be live, and there was a brief moment there when I was live a little bit too quickly. So apologies for the slight technical problem there. But we should be looking at this now, and everybody should be able to see me and to hear me as well. A reason for the necessary explanation is that I am, of course, switching back to the new old OBS system, which is a little bit more of a little bit more work in actually using, but it is free, of course, whereas StreamYard is a bit of a rip-off. So if everyone can let me know how we're doing for sound. Okay, sound's a bit bad apparently. Let's have a listen. Just bear with me a moment. Right, okay. Let's see how this works. Right, how's that? I've shut down the second microphone. Is that any better in terms of sound? On the ground, I see the problem with OBS is it takes a while to get the different technical aspects right. That should be the echo taken care of. If it's not, let me know, and we'll see. All right. Okay. So we are now looking at. Okay. So the sound's good. Right. Okay. So that was because for some strange reason OBS decides it wants to have two mics running at the same time. Right. So here we are on a slightly cheaper system due to the fact that I have decided to free myself piece by piece from the clutches of corporate control. So using more open source software now and looking to get out from, as far as possible, the control of the tech barons. So let's have a look at who we've got here with us tonight. So we've got, going from the top, somebody called Burhav dropped in earlier and then left again. Don't know if you're still here. Daniel, good evening to you out there in the West Country. Ash, hello to you down under. We got Bad Wolf. We've got Jenny, who is our moderator for this evening. Thank you to you. We've got YepX. We have James Graham. We have Mike Martinez. We have Almir from the once and future Socialist Republic of Slovenia within the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. We have HM. YepX asks, have I ever done reviews of Soviet movies? Trying to think now. No, the only movie reviews I've ever done is of largely it's been Hollywood films. So I've done reviews of The Exorcist. These are all on Patreon, by the way, where I've done these. I've done reviews of The Exorcist, of Steven Seagal's Above the Law. That was an interesting one, actually, if you remember that one. That was done as a live stream. I've done a review of the Sean Connery movie, The Hill, a couple of other things as well. But no, you're right, YepX, it would be an interesting one to do some Soviet films. So yes, I'll take that suggestion on board. Hello to Morgan. You should blame the British Army for most things. Hello to Robert, and hello to Luca and AK and Chicken Pot Pie and right, we've got also Marius and Vera and so we've got Albert, we've got Working Prole Incorporated, we have Thomas Wolfe, What a Coinky Dinky, Martin Ellenkoff, President Jesus, Bryce R, Comrade Ian Foster, C. Bolt, Alexander Lukta, and Aziz. We've also got Levi Young, and President Jesus asked, Waterloo wasn't Soviet. Technically not. It was a Soviet crew directed, of course, by the great Sergei Bondarchuk, and it was financed though by the arch Italian Hollywood crossover mogul. I think it was Dino De Laurentiis who did the financing on that. So that was his work in terms of the money. So it was a Soviet director. We're working with a budget provided by like Italians and mainly Italian financing, and with Soviet resources as well. So it was a real sort of collaboration. It's a brilliant film. If you've not seen Waterloo, directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, I would recommend you do so. It's infinitely superior to that hunk of absolute crap that Ridley Scott served up the other year, which was just fucking tripe. I mean, like, it was. I was insulted on behalf of the French nation, to be honest. And having seen Gladiator Part 2, all I can say is that Scott is entirely consistent in producing lazy garbage these days. You wonder why he still bothers. I mean, the guy's got to have made enough money to fucking retire on, right? Right, so let's see. I just need to do one more technical check. And then... right, okay. Yes, because to make OBS work properly, I had to do a lot of setting up. The advantage of StreamYard is that you click on a few buttons and it does all the setup for you. So you there with OBS, you have to do a lot more of it yourself. But I think that's no bad thing. It is good to actually force yourself to learn, to be honest. So here we go. Yeah, Daniel is right. You can say that for most of modern Hollywood. You can, but the thing is, there was a time when Ridley Scott, regardless of what you thought of the merit of the film, he was at least a good director. You have things like The Duelists, which, again, there's arguments over the originality of that. I think it's an inferior movie to the old Polish film Potop, which features, I think, much better stories of dueling rivalries. But I know Duelist is a well-directed film. The original Alien is a well-directed film. Blade Runner, again, I think it's got its flaws. I don't think it's quite the unrestrained work of genius that many think it is. But it's a very interesting film. It's very well-directed and it's a very well-crafted film. Even something like Black Rain, which is like, pretty much a sort of standard 80s piece of Hollywood tripe. You compare Black Rain to most of the Hollywood stuff these days, it looks like a absolutely peerless work of art. Thinking of other things, I mean, look, the guy made Thelma and Louise, which is, it is, of course, a propaganda movie. They all are. All movies fundamentally serve to produce and reproduce various forms of bourgeois ideology, of course. But there's such a thing as well-made propaganda, and the Thelma and Louise is a very well-made film, very well-directed film. You go into, going all the way up to about 2000, really. Going up to Gladiator itself. Again, like, it ain't the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, even though there's elements of it that film that Scott took on there. But again, it's a well-made historical epic. Russell Crowe is very good in it. You compare that to Gladiator 2, which is just a bloated CGI stuffed absolute mess, and you can tell just how lazy and tedious the director has become. The only good thing about Gladiator 2 is just the fact that Denzel Washington just turned up and refused to play anybody other than himself, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, like I mean, if you want to talk about, we're kind of getting off topic here. The decline in like Hollywood. I mean, if you want me to get into that, I can do another stream on it another day. But you can track the decline in creativity through various different processes going on. Not the least of which, in fact, perhaps the most important of which is monopolization. You look at the amount of film studios that used to operate in the United States 45 years ago, so 1980, like where you had been through like the new Hollywood period, but you were starting to see like that brief wave of independence and creativity fade away. But even back then, you had a lot more movie studios competing with each other, and you had producers who were more serious about like putting out a product that was at least decent and that was at least well made. And what happens is you go through the 80s and 90s and you hit the 2000s, and you're seeing just Hollywood following the rest of like the US corporate world and this endless series of mergers. I mean, I was actually in the United States many years ago now, almost 30 years ago, when the AOL Time Warner merger went through, and that was like serious big news in the United States. It's like this was a huge deal, and I think when they got away with something like that, which was I think it must have been late 90s. It was you could see that this was the way that things were going to go. Like you had this complete deregulation, you had escalating series of mergers, and then Hollywood found they found like a formula in the 2000s which they thought would lead to endless profitability, like the Marvel formula, which Feige, the guy who's like the sort of mastermind of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he found a formula for essentially making superhero movies in that initial period relatively cheaply compared to the budgets that you see them attaining later on, and making them into big hits. And that's what, of course, attracted Disney, and then you get the whole Marvel universe thing taking over everything. But what happens is with when you get more and more mergers, you have these studios looking for guaranteed hits on minimal outlay. So like, whereas in 1980 or even 1990, you could have convinced a studio to fund like some quite interesting mid-market film. What do I mean by mid-market? I mean like something which wasn't expensive, maybe which is a drama or a romance or a comedy that would be it would cost considerably less than like a Hollywood epic or a summer blockbuster, but it stood a good chance of at least making its money back and making a small profit. You used to be able to, if you were a director or a writer with a project, you used to be able to get at least some of those funded. And that was the case until like the late 90s, early 2000s. And you start to see that sort of, that mid-range movie start to get more and more pushed out. Now you just get a few so-called prestige films, which when you watch them are mostly fucking tripe, like god-awful. And so like studios, due to monopolization, stopped taking risks, and were looking for guaranteed bankables. And that meant a very shallow chasing of like whatever social media trend was on at the moment, or whatever a bunch of crusty, out of touch producers and marketing men were told that the kids were into. So you get like really embarrassing, useless pandering in a lot of Hollywood films, designed to attract an audience that is largely uninterested these days anyway. And so what you have is a system in the United States where creativity has been absolutely killed stone dead by monopolization and all that goes with it. And that is the biggest single factor in the death of American cinema. Now, there's a lot of other factors as well. As of course, you have that's the baseline economic factor. Now, from the economic factor, of course, flowers forth all of the other elements that render a lot of culture to be total garbage these days. So, like I said, the chasing of the trend of the minute, an embarrassing attempt to cash in on it. That'll be one aspect of it. The other aspects are like you have the intervention of the intelligence agencies and various other government forms of government in Hollywood productions. This is all very well established, pushing certain agendas, pushing certain lines. They've always done this. They just used to be slightly better, at least making it look as if this wasn't happening. These days you can see it coming a mile away, and you don't have to be a Marxist to see this coming. A lot of people can. And sometimes, so they've ceased to be subtle, even in their propaganda. They've ceased to be subtle in their messaging. And the other parts of this are that the industrial base of the USA, the actual, has of course withered away. Now, how does this affect things like Hollywood? How does this translate over? It translates over because where you have a system whereby you're not even trading in commodities anymore. Your economy is based on the moving around of money. From commodity money to just money to money, to use Marx's example in Capital Volume 2. What that breeds is, again, a system whereby it's just all about literally how cheaply you can produce it, how quickly you can put it out there. And what does that give you? That means that studios will hire inexperienced directors who don't know how to argue their case, who don't know how to stand up to the studio, who will just be literally pushed around by the producer. And they will hire writers who are cheap because they will just produce a script that could just have easily have been churned out and spat out by an AI because it's just various trends of the minute boiled down into a script. No characterization, no effort at telling a story, even to tell a good propaganda story. And what you end up with is like a bunch of writers who have no idea how to write interesting characters or interesting narratives, pumping out like stuff which is all based upon like social media trends. And they wonder why the studios are going to replace them with essentially a writing machine. Because essentially it's already happened. They're already regurgitating like the dregs from the bottom of the barrel of this horrendous Western popular culture is already just being recycled and spat out onto a script by some scriptwriter who hasn't got a fucking clue and who's been hired because he or she or they or them or it, we, he, she, me, you, they has no experience, has no ability to write, but he's cheap. And there you have it. Cheapness, search for instantaneous profit, a chasing as a result of trends of the minute, refusal to put serious money into a film, refusal to hire experienced directors or writers, and a rush to pander to, again, whatever is going on in the media sphere. And there you go. You end up with like utter dross filling the screen. And it's rare that you have a director who can actually put something out there that is interesting. It's like the reason why I bothered to see something like June 1 and 2, even though I had severe problems with the way that those films were ultimately the way those stories were ultimately told, the adaptation ultimately went, and I thought that Timothée Chalamet was not the right choice to the lead. At least Denis Villeneuve had some ambition. I don't think it came off, but at least there was some ambition there. But there you go. We've been we've been distracted with talk of Hollywood for a few minutes, but I will just divert back to our topic at hand. But I will say R.I.P. David Lynch, the man who made Twin Peaks, the man who made the original Dune, which is actually, I would argue, for all that it has myriad problems and was half destroyed by the studio, it was a magnificent watch, and still is. The film, the casting, the soundtrack, the sheer weirdness of it all is still a great piece of work from David Lynch, even though he, of course, disowned it. And you get other Lynch stuff like Wild at Heart, like, of course, Mulholland Drive. The man, whatever you thought of him, had a singular vision and never deviated from it. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, and he managed to get away with it for over 40 years. So, R.I.P., sir. You will be missed. Okay, so moving then to our main subject, which is, of course, it's taken us 28 minutes to get to it, but here we go. And that is the testimony of a certain Mr. Marco Rubio. Now, if you don't know who Mr. Marco Rubio is, or Little Marco, terrible guy, can't even drink a bottle of water, so I made him Secretary of State. Little Marco has been confirmed unanimously in his position as Secretary of State. And Little Marco had various things to say about the rise of China, which, of course, might be his own words, but might as well have just been written for him by the various different think tanks around Washington, D.C., and for all we know, they were. Now, if you're not familiar with the record of Little Marco, he is a man who has lied about his own backstory because, of course, he claimed that his family had fled into exile from the evil Fidel Castro in Cuba. Turns out that was a lie. Little Marco, his parents fled Cuba, indeed. They fled Cuba, that's true, but they fled Cuba under Batista. The guy who was working for the U.S. and who was the American mafia's best friend. So that's who they fled, Batista, not Castro. So Little Marco's been lying about that. He's probably been lying about a whole bunch of other things as well, allegedly. But we are not here to discuss the allegations about Marco Rubio, which you can Google. We are here looking at Rubio's demented accusations against China, which are pretty much standard for any American official making a statement about China these days, has to contain the following completely contradictory nonsense. One of which is to claim that China's on the verge of falling apart, which the American officials and the American press routinely claim that, and of course it isn't true. You get China motoring along at around about 5% growth per year, and at the same time you get China having $1 trillion trade surplus globally. So this is not only a gigantic economy that is making great strides in the field of electronic vehicles, in the field of nuclear power, in the field of quantum computing, in the field of medical research, and many, many other areas of scientific, technological, and industrial development. But you also have them running a gigantic trade surplus, whereas, of course, the US and the European countries all have gigantic trade deficits. That's what later stage imperialism looks like. And so Marco Rubio made all these claims. I don't have a Marco Rubio impression as yet, but I will be working on one if he sticks around much longer. So Rubio claimed that China is in trouble, maybe falling to pieces. Then he claimed that within 20 years, China would be the hegemonic power. So it's falling apart, but it's going to take over the world. Interesting. Just the same with the Russia arguments. You get the same garbage repeated. Same garbage repeated when it comes to China. China is apparently falling apart, but at the same time, it's going to take over the world. Russia is apparently 5 seconds from defeat by the heroic NATO forces, but is also going to take over all of Europe. Pick your lie and stick with it. So, Rubio standard statements there, claiming that China's falling apart, but is also taking over the world at the same time. At the same time, Rubio started talking about the fact that China has, what did he say, bugged, cheated, and stole its way to superpower status, which is, of course, again, a standard whinge of American imperialists. And it is to this that we will now turn. And so I want to address this because this is as I said, it's the standard complaint of American officials, and they are always making these claims, making the claim that the Chinese have stolen all the technology that made their economy as large as it is, that they've stolen secrets, industrial secrets from the United States, that it's all a con, that it's all a cheat. They didn't get there through legitimate means. Well, if we want to start getting into the idea of what is a legitimate way to get to the gigantic amount of economic growth that China has seen over the past 40 years, and at one time the US system enjoyed, well, we could do a comparison of the two and see who has committed the most crimes in their attaining the level of economic development that they have. My guess is that it's the US who will be the winner of that particularly dirty contest, not the Chinese. Now, let's deal first of all with this idea. Again, comes up in whinging self-pitying pieces in bourgeois journals in the United States and also in Britain, that the Chinese stole and cheated their way to industrial development. Where does this accusation come from? It comes from the fact that the Chinese were careful when they started inviting Western corporations into China to be blunt, to take advantage of the much cheaper labor there. They insisted on technology sharing agreements to being made with companies like Volkswagen, who were one of the first to open up a factory in China. And they did this, again, upon the insistence of the Chinese government, as a co-development with I believe that all the way back in 1980, it was a Chinese state tractor company that was going into partnership with Volkswagen. And so this model that the Chinese have adopted comes from the earliest period of what is referred to as reform and opening up. So, co-development, technology sharing, these were two key parts of the agreements that the Chinese brokered with all of these Western companies. So with West German and German companies, with Italians, French, British, Spanish, and of course the United States. And all of these countries, all of these corporations, were happy to sign all of these agreements, going back all the way to the early 1980s. So they were co-developing technologies. The state-owned enterprises were partnering with these Western corporations and learning from them in terms of technology sharing and production processes. And the Chinese got where they were because they were clever enough to insist upon this. They knew that the corporations from the US and the rest of the Western world were interested in exploiting the labor of the Chinese working class. And if they were going to do that, they were at least going to have to pay a premium in doing so. And that premium wasn't necessarily just in profits. It was in the sharing of technology. And again, they were happy to do this because in their laziness and their arrogance, the US and other ruling classes of Western Europe never thought for a moment that the Chinese would be able to take advantage or maximize the advantages that they had gained through this co-development of industrial enterprises and the sharing of technology. And so they were surprised when the Chinese started, of course, to develop their industrial base and their technological abilities much further and much quicker throughout the later 1990s and into the 2000s. And the complaints really start from they were there in the early 2000s, because I remember being shown examples of these kind of like pathetic moaning from the US and the Europeans, particularly the US, but it pre-2008. But it really took off after 2008, as we have covered on this channel many times before. You'd think that the US imperialists would be more grateful, given that they were kept afloat essentially by the Chinese buying a gigantic amount of dollar debt, because, as has been said elsewhere, it was within their interests to do so at that moment. They didn't want the US domestic economy to just tank overnight, because it would be very dangerous, given it's a massive export market for the Chinese economy. So what has been going on, though, in the US and in Western Europe, because these are all imperialist powers, is, of course, wholesale deindustrialization going back many, many decades now, but intensifying since, of course, the later 1970s. And there you see the building up of the Chinese industrial base going along with the deindustrialization of the West. Now, Trump, of course, and Rubio following along behind him, says, the problem is China's been eating our lunch. It's been eating our Big Macs for so long. And you get all the half-wits in the Republican Party and the Democrats as well. They've been as guilty of this as anybody. Will repeat this message endlessly. But, well, if it is the case that American industry did get exported, and it is indeed the case that a lot of it didn't all go to China. I mean, quite a big chunk of it went to Mexico and has stayed there. A certain amount of it also went to places like India, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, and also other smaller nations in the Pacific Rim. And this was all done by American corporations in the 70s, 80s, particularly the 1990s. And so the deindustrialization and the destruction of working class life inside the United States, particularly in the internal areas or in what's called the old Rust Belt, this deindustrialization, which exploded after the NAFTA agreement in 92, 93, they all wanted to globalize production, take it out of the United States, put it somewhere cheaper, and pocket the profits. But when it came to the grim reality that the Chinese had played the game in a superior fashion, which they had so far anyway, and the US had basically cut its own knees off because it could no longer compete industrially with the Chinese, can't compete industrially in terms of war production with the Russians either. They've realized that they have essentially destroyed themselves, which is what imperialism does. It wasn't some scheme of Deng Xiaoping. It wasn't some scheme of Yang Zemin or Wen Jiabao or Hu Jintao. It wasn't their act of malevolence which deindustrialized the United States. It was the impulses within the system. It was the US capitalist class that did that. They're the ones that deindustrialized the United States, as is always the case when it comes to imperialist powers. You move from a system of relative free competition, and in the earlier parts, early to middle 19th century, and post the unification of the country, post the Second American Revolution, which is, of course, the Civil War, you see the development of the US into the imperialist period. And when you go into the imperialist period, deindustrialization, degeneration, and parasitism are the future for all countries that go into that. again, Marx mapped all this out in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. This was known as soon as this was known really from Capital Volume 1. The process became obvious. Marx spelt it out in equation terms in Capital Volume 2. Lenin then does the work of fleshing out the realities of this with the assistance of the academic works of someone like Hobson. So the path of imperialism has been well understood by Marxist-Leninists for, over 100 years if we're looking just back at Lenin. But in terms of the Marxist tradition, it's going all the way back to Marx himself. This was the process by which the major industrialized nations would essentially consume themselves and become completely parasitic. This was known and understood by Marx and Engels themselves. And so the fact that the US has gone in the direction that it has done, the fact that they follow along with the British and the French and the Germans and the Italians and the Spanish, but particularly Britain and the USA being the two most advanced imperialist powers, this wouldn't shock anybody who'd read any Marx, Engels, or Lenin. The things are proceeding in exactly the way that you would expect if the process is not interrupted by the American working class defeating the parasitic ruling class. But of course, this is not explained to most American workers. You blame the Mexicans, you blame the Chinese, you blame Justin Blackface Trudeau, maybe justified on the last one, but you particularly blame the Chinese, who are being so unfair to us. America is getting ripped off. It's getting ripped off everywhere. And I mean, that's the complaint of Trump. But again, he's not the original with that. He hasn't just come up with that kind of shit. This is an old grumble that goes back, in actual fact, all the way to like Britain in the later 19th century, where you have the liberals as the party of imperial expansion, and the conservatives and Lord Salisbury being the more reticent and being the more protectionist. And some of the same arguments that Trump uses now, you got floated around back then, because the Conservative and Unionist Party, as they were known, and still I think officially are known, used to contain within it people who would say things like, the colonies are taking advantage of us Britons and our generous nature. It is a disgrace that so many British goods are being now manufactured in India, of all places. I find this absolutely reprehensible, and I ask the Honourable Lord to revisit the policy around tariffs and protection of British industry. That's my best impression of a backbencher in the House of Lords, but that's broadly speaking also the opening part of the old great British working class novel, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, where the working class militant Owen, named after the utopian socialist Robert Owen, Owen is arguing with his workmates about free trade versus protectionism, and broadly speaking, with of course differences due to time and countries, broadly speaking, it's the same argument that the likes of Trump make today. It used to be that the British Tories and British reactionaries back in the late 19th century would argue that too much money was going to the colonies, that Britain was getting ripped off on trade, and what we needed was more protectionism. Because what was starting to happen in the later 19th century, as chronicled by Lenin, was that Britain, being the first advanced capitalist power, the first imperialist power, was starting to go through the process that everybody else would go through later on, meaning that it used to be the case that that the colonies were just used for raw extraction of raw materials, which they were largely used for that. But due to the fact that there was a drop in the profitability of employing the labour of British workers in the later 19th century, you start to get the exports of industries, certain industries start to get exported to the colonies. So you start to see a degree of industrialization. Even in India, which got horribly deindustrialized and assets stripped by the British did start actually investing in factories in India again in the later 19th and early 20th centuries. You actually saw an expansion of the Indian proletariat, who of course immediately rapidly turned on the British and formed some of the spine of the Indian independence movement. Same process went on in some of the African nations as well. You started to get a bit of industrialization, a bit of an industrial base being built by the imperialists, because they were looking to export capital over there and employ cheaper labor than they could do in Britain. So this is where the arguments came about in the later 19th century that Britain was losing out on trade and that its colonies were draining it of resources. This was a serious argument. Well, it's not a serious argument, but it was a noisy argument put forward by the protectionists at the time. The colonies were a drain on the resources of Britain. It's the same argument that the Trump crew puts out now, that America is losing money to all these countries. Why are we giving money to Ukraine, etc., etc.? Of course, you're not giving money to Ukraine. That money's going straight through Ukraine and out the other side. The only people who are getting paid in Ukraine are the comprador clique around Zelensky. But this is the perennial problem. Which is that these reactionaries, these dollar store reactionaries, don't understand their own system. They don't understand that what happened to Britain is happening now to the United States. What happened to Britain, of course, is built into the system. It is baked into capitalism, or at least it was in that early period, for countries to become imperialist powers, for the advanced industrialized nations to become imperialist powers, and then for them to actually they are compelled by the very nature of the system to invest in their own demise. Invest in industrialization in Germany was partially fueled by investment from British capitalists. Industrialization in the United States was partially based on investment from British capitalists, who, of course, then realized that they were cutting their own knees off because the United States became far more industrially powerful than the British themselves. As I've said before, it was obvious by the mid-1850s that the U.S. were, in terms of its innovation around productive processes, around science and technology, was along with the Germans starting to outperform the British, and the British started losing out badly to competition in terms of coal production, steel production, and the chemical industry. In terms of production of means of production, they started to get outstripped by the US, by the Germans. By the end of the 19th century, it was obvious that there was a glaring gap growing between the British and their immediate rivals, and the British ruling class, as they've been doing ever since, started to think that they could invest in new means of production. They could try and innovate to get back on a par with the US and the Germans, or they could just continually export capital overseas and for a bigger return. And of course exploit what they thought was a protected market in terms of the colonies. So they used to think that, it doesn't matter about us competing with the US or the Germans because we have our protected markets here in the colonies. We have our protected markets in terms of the dominions, and we can make money just off continually exploiting those. Of course, that didn't work, and due to the fact that the British got themselves involved in World War I and ended up beggaring themselves to the United States. The United States, of course, insisted on more and more access to the Dominion countries and the rest of the British Empire throughout the early to mid part of the 20th century. Again, similar but slightly different processes are going on with the United States. You see Trump endlessly complaining about Mexico's ripping us off, Canada's ripping us off, and the actual truth is that the whole construction of NAFTA and the exporting of manufacturing jobs to Mexico was, of course, again, much like with the manufacturing jobs going to China, it was the U.S. capitalists who were doing that. Even, you even got protests over that back in the 1990s that actually understood that. And, of course, Trump doesn't want people to understand that. He wants to pursue his own rather crude lines of propaganda. But, again, so if the U.S. approach is going to be what Rubio was saying in his confirmation hearing, and what Trump has been blathering about, very unfair, very bad. Like he seems to think that he can make some sort of deal with President Xi. Now, Xi will, I'm sure, indulge Trump in a conversation, but is he going to allow the Americans to get their way? And what the Americans will essentially do, what the U.S. ruling class wants to do, is to essentially demand that China cripples itself and stops developing at the rate that it is. Well, the Chinese aren't going to agree to that. I mean, these people have long memories. The Chinese party trains its cadres, its senior cadres especially, in a keen awareness of the history of the Chinese nation, including, of course, what's referred to as the Century of Humiliation. That's a very real and living legacy that the Chinese have. The Chinese base their judgments on overcoming. So why on earth would the Chinese do Trump a favor now, when he's filled his cabinet full of like the worst hawks imaginable, the anti-China maniacs, when they're babbling and raving about standing up for Taiwan or preventing a war over Taiwan? Well, the best way to prevent a war over Taiwan is for the US to get the fuck out and away from Taiwan, stop providing it with weapons, stop making provocative visits there, and allow the very long-term process of negotiations between the government of China and its separatist province known as Taiwan, and to allow those negotiations between the government of the People's Republic and the representatives of Taiwan to reach a fruition, which would probably result in a one country, two systems type deal, and the full reunification of China by 2049. If you allow these processes to play out, that is what will happen. But of course, the people in the U.S. screaming and bellowing and demanding some kind of war know very well that if that happens, then they will have even less of a chance of destroying the Chinese, which is really what this is all about. If China fully unifies its economic setup with that of Taiwan, and by the way, the Taiwanese were one of the leading investors in the Chinese special economic zones in the 1980s and 1990s. I do believe that there's still quite a lot of investment coming from Taiwan into China. So these aren't two entities that had nothing to do with each other. There's a lot of business that's been done there. There's, of course, a lot of family ties across the narrow stretch of water that separates the province of Taiwan from mainland China. So this U.S. idea that they are going to provoke a war, force the Chinese into a special military operation of their own, it's a completely mad and completely stupid idea that could only come about via desperate wishful thinking on the part of the U.S. And one can only hope that the Taiwanese masses are smart enough to realize that they're being lined up to be the next Ukraine by the likes of Marco Rubio, by the likes of the various other creatures in the Trump cabinet, and let's be honest, the Democrats as well, who were as absolutely on board with this as Trump is. They just wanted to do Russia first. Now, we will come to Trump and Russia in just a moment. So the idea that the Chinese stole their way to great power status, that they cheated their way, as Marco Rubio says, to these massive economic achievements that they have. This is just simply cope. It's cope put out there by a hack like Rubio, who probably doesn't understand the process by which China grew. He probably doesn't understand the process by which the US grew, to be fair. Neither do most of the cretins that exist in either the House of Representatives or the Senate. And before any Americans, I don't think any Americans watching this will get upset, before any Americans out there watching this want to defend the honour of the US Congress, I will say that every single member of the British Parliament, Commons and Lords, is just as stupid, just with a slightly classier accent. So don't get upset. We're all ruled by bottom-of-the-barrel, deeply corrupt degenerates who would sell their own mothers for cash. In fact, some of them probably have. So the point is that none of these people understand what the fuck they're doing. None of them understand the system that they're supposed to be running. They have absolutely no idea about how the system that they are nominally a representative of works. You don't need to be a genius to work this out. Once you've worked out by doing some basic research how the British and the US economies actually work and the very shaky basis upon which they exist, and then you look at the economic understanding of a Marco Rubio, or, like, to be honest, some of the secretaries of the Treasury in the United States, or Biden, or Trump, or Keir Starmer, or Kemi Badnoch. Do these people understand the system they are nominally in charge of? No, they don't. Rishi Sunak, as a man who'd actually been a banker, might have had a slightly better understanding because he'd actually worked in the dominant industry in Britain. But even he, I don't think, would have understood the whole system. And so what you have when you see these clowns making these pronouncements about China this, that, and the other, these people have not a clue about the actual reality of the story of how the Chinese attained the achievements that they've managed to get so far, why they are stretching so far ahead now of the US in so many fields. These people have no idea. They just read lines given to them by like think tank goons, which are staffed by like some of the most aggressive, demented representatives of US imperialism. And so the people in charge haven't got a clue. Trump, let's be honest, hasn't got a fucking clue. And why would he? The guy, the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys before him didn't have a fucking clue either. So why would he? He's no better or no worse in that respect. And just to move now to Trump, because already the bullshit is being revealed for what it was. The idea of Trump as he was going to come in and solve the Ukraine war. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's already sounding like Biden. Michael Tracy has been particularly good at reporting on this, and he's made the accurate observation that like Trump's already just sounding like Tony Blinken, like in when it comes to the Ukraine war. Trump's already just going on about we got to have peace for strength. Russia is suffering very badly right now. They need peace, so they got to agree to make concessions. And like you break down his statements on like Truth Social and like the statement he gave recently. I think it was today, and like it's stuff that I mean, it's in Trump's own verbiage, but it's stuff that Tony Blinken could have said 2 weeks ago. So he's already just adopted like the standard State Department line. Now, I know that Trump's defenders, if they're not all still chasing after Whitney Webb on X and complaining about the fact that she dared point out that their hero is repeatedly conning them and betraying them, if the Trump supporters are going to start getting upset about this, you just look at what he says and compare it to things that Tony Blinken has said. Michael Tracy is right. Trump's already adopted like Zelensky's formula. But because, of course, it's not Zelensky's formula. It's the State Department's formula. It's London's formula. So Trump is already rhetorically moving in that direction. Now, I know that his defenders will say, but he's got a secret plan. He's sending General Kellogg to Moscow, etc., etc. He'll send Marco Rubio to Moscow. Now, maybe he will. Let's say that he will. If Marco Rubio goes to Moscow with the same bullshit that Trump's been hawking around the past couple of days, what response do you think he's going to get? The Russians have no reason to listen to that kind of nonsense. They have no reason to concede to the US. They have no reason to concede what the State Department and what the psychos in London want them to concede. The psychos in London just want the war to continue at all costs. We should always remember that. But what concession, what carrot can Trump hold out here? What, access to Western markets again? I don't think that'll be on the cards. They're not going to allow that. So that concession probably won't be made. So what concessions will be made? There's nothing they can offer. The only reason that the Russians would want some kind of deal, I think, would be to reach some kind of security arrangement with or understanding with the US imperialists that they don't have at the moment. Now, Trump might offer that. I doubt that he will. I don't think that this administration knows what the fuck it's doing. It knows what the fuck it's doing, but even less than the Biden gang did. The Biden gang did have a clear agenda. They had a clear agenda that they were following, which is dedicated towards the defeat and destruction, or the destruction of Russia via internal revolt. That's what they were after. They knew they weren't going to win when it comes to the battlefield, as myself and Kit Clarenberg covered in yesterday's edition of Decline and Fall. So, what is the Trump agenda? Well, it's all over the fucking place. It's much less coherent than the Biden agenda. I mean, Biden's agenda failed due to the fact that it was throwing good money after bad and trying to prop up US imperialism in its decaying state. Trump, on the one hand, is giving the likes of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel billions and billions of dollars through state subsidies, building some sort of nightmarish computer infrastructure. On the other hand, he's saying, well, we're going to engage in industrial protectionism. We're going to reach a deal with China, but we're also going to sanction China. So what is it that Trump can offer China that China doesn't have already? Like, what is he going to threaten them with more sanctions? Well, the Chinese will divert their trade elsewhere. They'll find workarounds. The Chinese goods will still end up in the United States because Trump's policy of trying to get US capital to reinvest in the United States again. Well, the only way you're going to get that is if somebody puts enough sanctions on US capital to force it to. They're not going to do it just off their own back. They're not going to reinvest inside the United States because it's not profitable to reinvest inside the United States. Trump can't force that. Well, Trump could try and force that, but he's not going to. He's going to stuff their pockets with silver and hope that some of it gets spent. But it will suffer, all of his grandiose ideas will suffer the same fate, as I said earlier in a post on Twitter. Trump's grandiose visions for rebuilding American manufacturing will go the same way as Biden's, which is there'll be a lot of subsidies, there'll be a lot of money spent, but it won't go anywhere. The money will drain away into corporate bank accounts. It'll be used to do stock buybacks. There'll be a few individual projects produced that won't mean anything in terms of turning around the long-term decline. And then Trump will lean more and more into identity politics of the MAGA variety to cover up his failures. This administration is going to be a fucking disaster. An absolute incoherent mess that when his industrial plans don't work, Trump will do what his instincts tell him to do, which is he'll give the Wall Street gang, the ultimate parasites, anything they want in terms of deregulation, and probably try to pull a Milei, which won't work either. So this administration is going to be a disaster, just like the last one was, because there's huge problems facing US imperialism, which nobody inside the system has the slightest clue or inclination regarding what to do about it, or what to do about any of them. The ruling class fundamentally doesn't want to change, and so Trump won't make them change. And you see these fucking babbling frauds in the multipolar media space raving on about how Trump's like Oliver Cromwell said one foolish observer? Well, only in the sense that perhaps you could paint him warts and all, or perhaps you should. But Trump is, if anything, like just another mad emperor, just like Biden was. Slightly less mad, more funny, but in reality incapable of solving the problems in front of him, because he is a representative of the US ruling class. And the US ruling class doesn't want to fundamentally change anything. They want the same deal Biden gave them, that nothing will fundamentally change. And so what will happen is that the cost of living for the American worker will continue to go up. The amount of debt that the American worker is in will continue to go up. The infrastructure of the United States will continue to crumble. And the tech overlords will continue to profit from gigantic fraudulent schemes that will go nowhere. So this is the way in which things will go. I'm not. I don't think I'm sticking my neck out too much in making these rather broad predictions. I can be more specific if people feel like I should be. But Trump will not end the war in Ukraine. He will absolutely not do that. And I will give you a very specific reason why. He does not have the personnel in place inside his administration that would actually enable him to engage in a negotiation with the Russians that will lead to a settlement. The war in Ukraine will be ended on whatever terms the Russians can find acceptable. The only thing that the thing that the Russians would look for from Trump is to get a guarantee of a neutral Ukrainian state that exists between the areas of Novorossiya and the West. That deal will not be done. It will not be done. And part of the reason why it won't be done is because the moment that Trump does what would need to be done to force that settlement, which is telling the Kiev regime that the game is over, Mr. Z, if you want to, there's a place on the plane for you. You can go and co-present the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the very bad, very nasty guy, but you can get your cock out and play the piano with him. And that would be the offer to Zelensky: go into exile, appoint somebody else, end the war. Well, that will end up being as unstable then as any other US proxy where the US engineers a regime change in it because they don't feel like the proxy is behaving itself. If they compel Zelensky into making concessions, then the power will drain away from him and somebody will take a shot at him. Somebody who's nominally on his own side. That's what will happen. The Kiev regime, if it is forced and compelled by the US to make concessions, under the threat of losing aid, under the threat of having weapons shipments stopped, as soon as that happens, the Kiev regime will become incredibly unstable and possibly disintegrate. Bear in mind, this is a regime which is horrendously unpopular with the great bulk of the Ukrainian population. And he's held together by the fact that Zelensky is the West's man and he keeps the money coming in. The moment that is endangered, Zelensky is a dead man, politically speaking, maybe physically. So the moment that Trump puts the pressure on Zelensky's regime will fall apart and the whole thing will go down the tubes really quickly. And at that point, the Americans have a decision to make, which is, the American imperialists would have a decision to make, which is, well, do we walk? And look weak, etc. Now, Trump will be being told by the State Department officials and Rubio over and over again, Mr. President, we can't look weak. Mr. President, we can't let this go down in flames. Mr. President, if you put pressure on the Ukrainians, they will fall apart, and then we will end up with egg on our faces. Mr. President, we must have peace through strength. Mr. President, do you remember how Nixon secured peace? Peace with honor. Do you remember that? That was peace through strength. That worked well, didn't it? And so what you're going to get is a mess. Trump will make one statement in one direction, another statement in another direction. The Russians will work out very, very quickly that the US doesn't have a plan, doesn't know what to do, that there are several different competing factions within the Trump administration, that Trump is pulled one way and another, that whatever his own instincts are, in the end, don't matter, because this is a repeat of the first term already. Like, I will address this point to the clueless multipolar commentators who have the intellectual depth of a puddle and the historical memory of a goldfish. This is what happened in the first term. Trump would say, I want to get on with Russia. I want to do a deal with China. I want to do a deal with my friend Kim Jong-un. And what happened? Well, he ended up making relations with all of them worse. Why? It's not necessarily just the fault of Trump being an idiot. This is just the way that things inevitably are sliding. US imperialism, as an objective requirement, needs to defeat Russia, needs to break up the country and secure the end of the Putin system, just as they need to try and collapse the Chinese in the form of the PRC and to defeat the CPC. So what is required is the defeat and destruction of both of these major powers, which isn't going to happen. But that's what imperialism needs. And if you don't understand that, that's what imperialism needs to revive itself, vampire-like, by sucking the blood out from these countries and soaking up their resources and stealing everything. If you don't understand that and you're still pushing the idea that there's going to be some kind of lasting accommodation, then you're a fucking fool, basically. Because how can you observe everything that's happened from Obama to Trump to Biden and back to Trump again, a same continuous trajectory that has been steered? How can you look at all of that and still think that one US president or another makes a difference? I saw shared the other day on Twitter the clip from the Oliver Stone interview with Putin from 2017. It must have been earlier, or even earlier, 2016, where Putin quite eloquently sums it up. He says that he's been around for, well, at that stage it was 16 years. He's seen 3 US presidents then, Bush, 2, Obama, and then Trump. And the presidents change and the policy doesn't. The policy won't change here either. Because for all that Trump might actually think that he can do a clever deal, separate the Russians from the Chinese, which he can't, or he can reach some kind of accommodation with Putin, well, he could, but he would be accepting the terms that come from the Russians in that case. So Trump will say this, it will go into the policy-making machine, and it won't go anywhere. And he will be presented with various options made for him by that machine, which is run by has Marco Rubio at the head of it. You have that dickhead Pete Hegseth at the head of the Pentagon. You have Eldridge Colby behind him, who's a sort of rabid anti-China hawk. So, what on earth is going to be the big difference here? Where is this going? It's going in the same direction that it would have gone under Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, and Jake Sullivan. It's just going to be occasionally Trump will make us laugh with by slagging off Mike Pompeo, Ozempic Mike, and Nikki Haley and John Bolton, whilst doing all the things that those 3 would do anyway, because he's not got a fucking clue how to turn this thing around, any more than Lord Salisbury stood a chance of turning around the British Empire 125 years ago. He hasn't got a clue what to do and where to go, and neither does anybody around him either. Maybe Bannon has more of a brain going on, but not by much. So get used to it, Americans, just as we have to as well. The leaders of the West have no idea how to turn it around because the system can't be turned around. It can't be. The only future for the American Republic is if its current ruling class is overthrown. That's the only chance. I mean, they're going to try and make up for the losses by trying some rampage across the Caribbean, Central and Southern America, but I wouldn't bet on them winning those rampages. Not at all. Maybe they could, invade and take out Haiti, but my guess is the Haitians would resist, as they have every right to. I wouldn't bank on them being able to knock over Venezuela or Nicaragua either, who have far greater international connections and more friends these days. Now, maybe they could take out somebody like Petro in Colombia. Maybe that'd be something that they could do, color revolution style. Maybe not even him. This is a fading power and a flailing ruling class that has no idea anymore how its own system works or how it got this way. And their politicians only are responding with solutions that might have had a chance of working 20 to 30 years ago, but have no chance of working now. There is no chance that the American capitalism reindustrializes the continental United States, unless, of course, it reduces the American proletariat to the status of abject slavery. So nobody should tolerate the delusions peddled by people who should know better. I can understand why some American workers might have hated Biden so much that they voted for Trump. That's understandable. Just like it's understandable in bourgeois elections in Britain, if certain people hate the Labour Party so much, they vote for Farage, or they vote for the Greens, God forbid, or they vote for some other fucking horrendous bourgeois idiot, just basically based on the fact that they only know what they hate. They don't know what they require. They don't know what they need yet, which is why our only solution, whether you're in the United States or old perfidious Albion itself, is not putting your faith in any of these bourgeois hucksters, conmen, and clueless morons who will only lead you on an uninterrupted downward spiral. The only chance is the revival of class struggle. That's the only chance. That's the only thing that's going to take us forward. Not these conmen, whether they are conmen from the right or conmen from the left. They are all just in it to con you. To con us into thinking that the system can be preserved somehow by, I don't know, ushering in a new dawn of social democracy, or ushering in a new dawn of based American patriotism, which is just basically going to end up being a bad remix of Ronald Reagan. So forget all this shit. This is just con artistry and stupidity and lies, and it's going to go nowhere. And it's certainly not going to defeat the Chinese either. So no more con games, no more lies, no more falling for this, and no excuses from the people who are trying to sell this to you either. It's like fundamentally the reporting done by people like Whitney Webb and Michael Tracy is correct. It's like people are as bad with reading things into Trump that aren't there as they were, as I've said before, in reading things into Obama that were never there. Trump is just Obama for subpar multipolarists and small time reactionaries. All right. Sid Hatfield says more than 85 million Americans didn't vote at all. Those are the people we need to be reaching. And Sid is completely correct. Like the number of the people who didn't vote at all got more votes than either Trump or Harris. So you've got like a group there in the United States, which is huge, which has opted out of the system. And there'll be various different reasons why that's happened, of course, but you'll have millions of American workers who will literally look at the choice before them in bourgeois elections and say, fuck it. Why would I? Why should I? Why should I engage with that? And that worker, who going through that thought process, he or she is far more alert to the realities of the American situation than somebody putting their faith in the Democrats or the Republicans or Trump as a personality. Like those 85 million Americans who don't vote at all in the presidential elections, they have a far greater degree of understanding than those that do. It's those that do that have got the most illusions, whether it is that the Democrats are bringing back the ghost of FDR or that Trump's going to usher in the new age of, MAGA paradise or whatever the fuck it is. But there you go. Right, okay. Movie Maker Joe, I wasn't down with the kids when I was a kid. I reject your accusation. Marius makes the correct point. Opportunism is fundamentally rooted in a desire for easy shortcuts. Yeah, and there's all kinds of opportunism. Left opportunism and right opportunism. And there's a lot of it about. Right, okay. So, and yes, before anybody asks, I am going to try and get Whitney Webb on the show, but it may be a hard sell. If anybody out there knows her, let her know that we're open to what will be a very interesting conversation. Right. So we are hitting the midnight hour here, 20 past midnight in Perfidious Albion. So I'm going to draw things to a close for this evening. We will return to you tomorrow at the slightly earlier time of 7:30. So be sure to join us then with a even better technical setup and hopefully streaming to more locations. Now I've worked out what the weird echo is. We'll have improved sound. So thanks to everybody who has tuned in tonight. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. But until then, here's your musical interlude.
Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe, snap these rivers, they're ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and elect cause them out to stand way. So Stalin put his hand and smoothed them away. Joe, he is beaten to Mandel Green, and big is that the world sees. Oh, Stalin is a man in a plan. He's a snake flower for the man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the workers' state the best the world has ever seen.